So, I've mentioned before the idea that B5 kind of had a building while lowering thing going on. As of this exact episode, that feeling no longer exists for me. Not that, not that I want to continue to relate this series to Deep Space Nine, but this reminds me of the final 9 or so episodes of Deep Space Nine, where it's clear that they're building up, or indeed winding down, to the finale. Although, completely different approach in those two works. Quite the contrary. I would say that if we were actually paralleling this to Deep Space Nine, the final episode of Deep Space Nine, What You Left Behind, would have been the last episode. And now we're still going, because this effectively feels like an epilogue, henceforth. Just kind of winding things down, wrapping things up, tying off a little bow, that kind of a thing. And for the record, I don't mind that. I know this is going to sound weird, but I kind of would have preferred it if they did this over on Voyager. Imagine if, over on Voyager, they got home 5 or 6 episodes before the end. And then they spent 5 or 6 episodes, or even 8 or 9, or however many, just a decent chunk of episodes on the epilogue. We all got home. Now what? What happens to our people? What happens to each of the characters? Have at least each of the main characters have one episode dedicated to them, or maybe them as an aggregate, these two people, both their stories kind of intertwined, kind of a thing. And see what happens. I actually would have liked that quite a bit, I think. So, Garibaldi's addiction problem finally comes to light. I find it funny how reasonable Sheridan is being, although, as he himself points out, Delenn is probably most of that, thanks to her perspective, since Sheridan tends to be... Well, ironically, Sheridan is very simple-minded, and actually so is Delenn, just in different ways. I find it amusing that the two of them match each other in that way so well, because they can help give each other perspective on the things that they themselves do not have it on. But I remember Garibaldi's greatest fear, and I haven't talked about this a lot. I brought it up once during the dream sequence, and that's about it. His fear of being out of control, of being unable to help people. And then there's that scene where Sheridan says, "I'm disappointed." And you just see Garibaldi like, "Oh, God, no, anything but that, please. I'd rather have you ranting and raging at me and fire me on the spot than be disappointed in me." Because Garibaldi knows that he's failed them. He's failed his friends, he's failed his duty, he's failed himself. And that's a hard feeling to have. I know what that feeling feels like. I imagine, actually, a lot of you do too, to some extent or another, to actually have failed yourself and others. And it sucks. And what's funny is, the obvious answer to that question is, well, you pick yourself up and you try again. And that is the correct answer. But it's not that easy, which brings me to the Lockley scene. And I'd say this is probably the one and only good thing they actually do with Lockley in all of Season 5. I was actually talking with Kay. I was going to say a friend, but I don't know if he actually considers me that. So I was talking with Kay. He does our CGI stuff for a lot of these things, and he's a cool guy in general. And we were talking about Lockley and the presentation of her. And one of the things I wanted to say, but I didn't because there was possibility for spoiling on the chat, is that for me, introducing Lockley felt like a weird move because it was effectively unnecessary. Now, I mean, obviously, this was not intended. I've already talked about that. I've already talked about the Ivanova thing and the actress thing and just blah, 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 blah. That whole mess, whatever. But if I was JMS and I was looking at the story, considering how much they had to radically alter Ivanova's role in Season 5, I would have just ejected it entirely. Because it is my blunt opinion that Lockley really didn't serve any actual narrative purpose in Season 5, except for this. This is the one exception right here. This episode, where she sits down with Garibaldi and explains and lays out not only what her father went through, but what she went through. And I have to admit there are precious few things that I've encountered in life that help someone to understand. Like if you say I understand, people tend to get pissed when you say that. If you say, I know where you're going from, or I get you. No, you don't understand me. You don't get me, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? But if you have actually been there and can demonstrate, no, I actually have been through what you're going through, or worse, or at least a version of what you're going through, they say misery loves company, and it's a weird sentence because it's not 100% true, but at the same time we tend to lower our guards a bit when we feel that someone else really does understand, that someone else actually has been through what we've been through, and therefore can relate, or we can relate to them. And you see that with Garibaldi. He does almost the perfect slide of, already on edge, lets himself lower a bit, spikes right back up, which is specifically a deliberate response to push her away, so he just doesn't have to deal with it. And then she keeps pushing back, lays out the truth, and then he plummets. All that anger just gone. Because now he gets that she's been where he is now. And I remind you, Garibaldi has been where he's been now more than once before now. So it was a nice touch, and it was a pretty humanizing scene, and I wish it just kind of hadn't come out of nowhere and been a character that I barely care about. I do also like the way Sheridan put it. Your problem isn't with you and me or you and the job, it's between you and you. You got to work this out. Now, what I find interesting is that Garibaldi says that he has no doubt whatsoever that his job was axed and that it was over. I want to talk about that briefly, because I don't believe that for a second. I mean, as much as there's some issues here, I have no doubt that if he truly fixed this and could prove it, he would have his old job back within a heartbeat. And, as we already know, he was already planning to abandon this job to go back with Lise and help head up Edgar's Industries, right? He may not have been 100% decided on that until this, though. Like, honestly, I think his sense of obligation and helping and trying to do the best he can probably was compelling him to stay with the Alliance, and this is what kind of finally drove him away from it. But here's the thing I want to talk about. Because I have a feeling that Garibaldi either genuinely believes he would have no chance of getting his old job back, or, and this one I find more interesting, wanted to believe it. I'm saying this wrong. I think it would be more accurate to say he believed that he shouldn't get his job back. Because he failed. He failed himself, he failed the Alliance, and he failed his friends. And in his own mind, he shouldn't have that job back. He doesn't deserve it. He hasn't earned it. He got his shot and he blew it. And knowing Garibaldi, I think that's the most likely scenario here. I'll be talking more about Garibaldi in a minute. I want to cover a couple other things really briefly here. First of all, Delenn is pregnant. Okay. I will say one thing about this. Obviously, we know that David's going to be a thing in the future. That's already happened in the show. We've already seen that in the future. It's already a thing. Moving on. How do I put this? Oh, excuse me. I like the idea that interspecies relations like this, I shouldn't say it that way, because interspecies relations are whatever. Interspecies pregnancies are a much bigger issue, and I like that they emphasize that this is an issue. That this might be a her or child situation, because it should be. Because this should be something that just doesn't happen. This is literally unprecedented, but it should be like this in general for cross-species breeding. And I say specifically breeding because, again, it's all about the actual child birth aspect. And whether, I mean, you can have issues by having a child with someone of your own species, never mind someone else's. Now, granted, this is a little bit of a in-betweeny kind of a situation since she's already half human. And, of course, Minbari in general already have a little bit of half human, half Minbari in them. So this is probably more likely to happen than other species. But I like that because that helps emphasize why this can happen at all. Because under other circumstances, it probably wouldn't. It wouldn't even be on the table. Nope, can't have kids. just not happening. And I like that because it makes sense. So Jakar, Jakar's in a bit of a Kobayashi Maru here. And it's funny that someone who so adamantly and so fervently does not wish to be a symbol, whose entire message is wanting people to think for themselves, is being used as an excuse to not think. I mean, I think that is a traditional form of irony right there. And it actually reminds me a lot of Byron in its own way, although better in every way, of course. But I'm reminded of the same situation. Byron was, anti-violence, and now people are actively bombing and terrorizing back home in Byron's name. Remember Byron. Talk more about that in a second. His line, though, about not having to think really resonated with me because I feel we do that a lot in real life, and well, the end, I suppose. We use a lot of things that are excuses. In fact, as I've said many times, the theme, my opinion, of Season 5 is lines. And as I pointed out, one of the big benefits of having lines is you don't have to think. Someone's on the other side of the line. Not good. Someone's on this side of the line. Good. Very simple. Doesn't require any thought. Doesn't require circumstances or individuals or complex variables or ratios or anything. It's just there or here. Very binary. And I like that. I think that is an excellent way to demonstrate lines without it being some of the more obvious presentations. I mean, clan mentality is an obvious line. Turning Jakar into a statue is a much more subtle line. And again, Jakar says it flat out. I have this statue, and everyone looks at this and believes it embodies all of the best qualities of themselves, and therefore they don't have to think about it anymore. He mentions the cult of personality. It's funny because Sheridan was being accused of that back then, but even Sheridan, who came back from Zahadum, was never actually flocked to the level that Jakar is. Although, it is worth noting, the Narn, how do I put this, probably need or are more inclined to be a cult of personality than most races are, my opinion. So, of course, he comes up with the answer, but we're going to move forward before we really talk about that. Just leaving is an interesting answer, although it is kind of an elegant one when you think about it. Trying to understand and figure out how to destroy that. I love how he puts that. Just get rid of this thing. So let's talk about Lita. So she is actively funding militant attacks back home. And she's also not putting up with any crap anymore. She has what I like to call arrogance born of confidence. In other words, there's a lot of different types of arrogance, some unfounded, some founded. But this is arrogance born of the fact that, no, I genuinely don't think you can do anything to me. It was probably shocking to her when Sheridan just walked up with a gun. I imagine she couldn't even read him at all. If you actually look back, there are a couple of other circumstances in which Sheridan pretty much is immune to telepathy as a result of either his interaction with the Vorlons or his interaction with the first one, whose name I've just forgotten. I can't think of his name. Now I'm going to get 50 comments telling me his name. Oh my god. Don't do it, guys. Don't do it. I actually can't think of his name. I'm not sure which thing actually granted Sheridan that particular power, but it is an interesting power in that it's just immune, straight immunity to her abilities. Keeping in mind, she demonstrably has telekinetic power as well when she knocks out that camera. There's no mind to influence there. So, I mean, we've known she's had telekinetic powers before, but that is kind of impressive for this setting, what she pulled off. Moving on. So, first I just want to say that she is a pretty classic example of VES. Now, I almost never get to talk about this on my show. It's a concept, it's a lorium, and I swear I'm going to write those down one day, that has to do with the idea of, it's VES is Vampire Ego Syndrome. The idea behind it is the moment you get some scraps of power that make you personally stronger than others around you, I don't mean political power, this is all about personal power, so this can only exist in fiction. But the moment you get a few scraps of personal power, it just goes straight to your head. And it's like, I am now this great, powerful person, and I will do all these things, and you are nothing to me. And I feel that's exactly what's happened with Lita. I'm not saying she's not that strong, but when you really sit back and think about it, she's not that strong. She is certainly stronger than those around her, absolutely. And just like vampire ego syndrome, she could be considered superior to the regular mundanes surrounding her. But that's it. You know, the right set of circumstances could still lead to her being taken down relatively easily. But she's, gloating and bathing in the power that she has. And she's also, oh, how do I put this? I think she's basically becoming a villain. I think that's the nicest way I could put that. Now, I don't quite blame her. Because remember, Lita's been through a lot of stuff. The Vorlons first. Oh, actually, the Psychor first. Then the Vorlons. Then Ulkesh, who just, wow, that was just messed up. And then the being used as a weapon against the Shadows, which, I mean, honestly, she shouldn't feel bad about that. But not being compensated for that, well, that's a little bit more of an issue. And then she finally finds someone she feels like she belongs with, and then you get hormones and emotions tangled into it, and then that guy frickin' dies. Yeah, she is actually an emotional mess right now. She has been messed with and abused and feels like she's not in control of her own life. And yes, I'm basically describing Garibaldi. See, the thing is, and I've talked about this many times before, as a writer, you can sit and stare at a character and then another character and have basically, or literally, the exact same set of circumstances affect both and have each character go a different direction in reaction to those circumstances. Because this is true in real life. How we react to things depends on, oh God, a bajillion, roughly, variables. I mean, one person may rise up in adversity, and another person may be crumbled under it, and another person may be consumed by it, you know? So we see here a nice contrast between Garibaldi and Lita, and it's best described when the two have a brief scene together. And she says, how much is your revenge worth it for you? Because that's what it's about for Lita right now. All she wants is to hurt them. And she has decided to focus her ire on Psychor. Garibaldi says, no, I told you, this isn't about revenge. This is about trying to get my life back in order. Because for Garibaldi, it's not about revenge, which is funny, because he himself, and I quote, is an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of a guy. And yet, at this point in his life, Garibaldi doesn't want revenge. He doesn't want petty vengeance. He wants to get his life back in order. And we see here now how much this has been affecting him. And I understand this personally, because I tend to have a little bit of a fixative personality myself, where there's one thing, and it's wrong, and it just kind of seeps out into the rest of your life, because there's that one thing that's wrong. It doesn't even necessarily matter if that thing is a big thing. It's wrong. And I can't do anything about it. Just like, Garibaldi cannot fix this problem. There is an aspect of his life that he is powerless about. And even if he never actually acts on that, he can't. And the fact that he can't, that's what bothers him. And he wants to get rid of that and hope that this will enable him to really get his life back on track and finally put that damn bottle to rest and never have to look at it again. That's what this is about for him, rebuilding. For her, this is just about destroying. And again, I'm not really casting judgment, because that's just how that happens. And again, she's been through some crap. But I would say very definitively that as of this point, I would call Lita a villain, or at the very least an antagonist. It's just she happens to be a villain for someone else, not us. We might be collateral in her fight with her opponent, but that's it. Yeah. What I love about this, though, Garibaldi, for all of his flaws, would never actually reach out to someone and say, I need you. It took Lockley to say that. Lockley sent the message to Lise, I need you. And Lockley would understand that. And like I said, this is the one good use she has. Remember the Day of the Dead episode? Where she saw what it was. Basically, Lockley needed someone to be there for her, and she kind of got it in the suicide involved therewith. And otherwise, she would have just been like, She understands what it's like to need someone when someone's going through what Garibaldi is going through. So she sends the message, understanding that, because Garibaldi would never send it himself, just like she never would have sent that message herself back then. Now, this is going to sound really cheesy. You can make fun of me for it if you want, but this is the value of friendship. Or, if you want to make a less cheesy statement, this is the benefit of an alliance. Because Garibaldi, through Lockley, will now have a strong platform to build a new life on. Because of Lockley and because of Lise. Because of other people, because of friends and allies and loved ones and family, he will now be able to rebuild his life. Lita is alone. That's actually all I got for this week. Again, we're kind of winding down. But I want to say one other thing. So Jakar is leaving, and Garibaldi's going to be heading back home, and Sheridan's going to be going to Minbar. And Londo, oh God, Londo sits alone in a throne room, with the lights dimmed and the windows shut. Everyone's just kind of slowly bowing out of this tale. But like I said, we're winding down. We got a few more episodes to go. And I'll see you next time, guys.